My name is Skylar, and I'm 22 years old. I never thought my own family would try to sabotage the biggest opportunity of my life. When my passport mysteriously disappeared days before my Oxford scholarship interview, I confronted my sister only to see that smug look on her face. What hurt even more was hearing my parents say, "Some opportunities aren't meant for everyone." They never imagined I had a backup plan until they saw me on international news accepting the award that changed my life forever. Drop a comment letting me know where you're watching from. Hit that subscribe button if you've ever been underestimated by the people who should have supported you most. Now let me tell you how I turned betrayal into triumph. I grew up in a middle-class suburban neighborhood just outside of Boston. Our house wasn't fancy, but it was in a good school district, which my parents, Michael and Diane, always emphasized was the reason we stretched our finances to live there. From an early age, I showed academic promise. I was reading chapter books by kindergarten, skipped second grade entirely, and by middle school, I was participating in the academic decathlon and winning regional debate competitions. My sister Tiffany was 2 years older than me, but couldn't have been more different. Where I excelled academically, Tiffany struggled to maintain C's. While I spent weekends at the library or science competitions, Tiffany was popular, pretty, and the life of every party. She had a natural charm that drew people to her, something I admittedly envied as I navigated school with my nose in books and few close friends. The difference in our personalities wouldn't have mattered much in a household that valued both types of achievements equally, but that wasn't our home. For reasons I couldn't understand as a child, my parents consistently favored Tiffany. When she brought home a C+ in math, there were celebrations and trips for ice cream. When I brought home straight A's and awards, there were brief nods and quick returns to whatever my sister was talking about. "That's nice, Skylar," my mother would say, barely glancing at my report card. "Tiffany, tell us more about the social committee you're joining." This pattern continued throughout our childhood. I vividly remember winning the state science fair in 9th grade with a project on renewable energy. I'd worked for months, staying up late to perfect my presentation. The awards ceremony was on a Saturday, and I asked my parents to attend. They agreed, seeming genuinely proud. That morning, Tiffany announced she needed to go shopping for a specific pair of shoes for a party that night. Without hesitation, my parents canceled our plans for the science fair. "We'll celebrate your award another time," my father said, patting my shoulder. "Tiffany really needs these shoes, and you know how important this party is for her social development." I attended the ceremony alone, accepted my gold medal with a smile that didn't reach my eyes, and took the bus home. There was never another celebration. Over time, I learned to stop seeking my parents' validation. I became self-reliant, celebrating my achievements privately, finding joy in the accomplishment itself, rather than external recognition. This wasn't healthy, I now realize, but it was how I adapted. There were two people who did recognize my potential. My maternal grandmother, Martha, lived about an hour away in a small apartment filled with books. She had been a teacher before retirement and took genuine interest in my academic pursuits. During summer visits, she would listen to me talk about historical events or scientific theories with real engagement, asking thoughtful questions, and recommending books that challenged me. "You have a beautiful mind, Skylar," she would tell me, "and more importantly, you have the determination to use it well." The other supportive figure in my life was Professor Jenkins, my high school AP government teacher, who later became my mentor. He was the first to suggest I consider international relations as a field of study, noting my ability to analyze complex global issues and communicate nuanced positions. "The world needs more minds like yours in diplomacy," he told me during my senior year. "You have the rare combination of intelligence and empathy that makes for transformative leadership." When I was accepted to a prestigious university in Massachusetts, on a full academic scholarship, Professor Jenkins was the first person I called. My parents attended my high school graduation and took the obligatory photos. But the celebration dinner that night somehow turned into a discussion of Tiffany's plans to transfer to a different community college after failing her courses at the first one. I learned to keep my expectations low. I loved my family, but I had accepted that our relationship had clear limitations. I would never be the favorite child, and my achievements would never receive the recognition that came so easily for my sister's much smaller accomplishments. It was painful, but I had Grandmother Martha and Professor Jenkins, and increasingly, I had my own inner confidence. Little did I know that this family dynamic would soon escalate from benign neglect to active sabotage. By junior year of college, I had established myself as a top student in the International Relations and Political Science departments. I maintained a perfect 4.0 GPA while working part-time at the university's Global Studies Center and volunteering as an English tutor for refugee families. My professors knew me by name, often asking me to contribute to discussions or stay after class to debate finer points of global policy. Professor Jenkins had moved to teach at my university the same year I enrolled, which felt like a stroke of incredible luck. He continued to mentor me, recommending conferences connecting me with former students now working in foreign service and pushing me to aim higher than I sometimes thought possible. It was Professor Jenkins who first told me about the Blackwell International Scholarship, whispering it like a sacred name one afternoon as we discussed my post-graduation plans. "It's the most prestigious scholarship in our field," he explained, eyes alight with possibility. "Only awarded to 5 students worldwide each year. Fully funded graduate studies at Oxford plus a guaranteed internship at the United Nations headquarters in Geneva." My heart raced at the mere thought. Oxford University had been a dream so distant, I hardly allowed myself to consider it. The United Nations was where I ultimately hoped to build a career, working on diplomatic solutions to global crises. This scholarship would open doors that normally took decades of networking and experience to access. "The application process is grueling," Professor Jenkins continued. "Multiple essays, recommendations, a preliminary interview. Most applicants spend 6 months preparing their materials. The final 15 candidates fly to Washington, D.C. for an in-person interview with a panel of international diplomats and academics." "Do you think I should apply?" I asked, trying to keep my voice casual despite the hope blooming in my chest. Professor Jenkins looked almost offended. "Skylar, I've been teaching for 27 years. I've had thousands of students. You are without question one of the most qualified candidates I've ever encountered. Yes, you should absolutely apply." Over the next 4 months, I poured everything into my application. I wrote and rewrote my essays, each focusing on different aspects of international cooperation and my vision for diplomacy in an increasingly divided world. Professor Jenkins reviewed each draft, pushing me to dig deeper, to be more specific about my contributions and aspirations. I submitted my application with a mixture of pride and terror. The waiting period was excruciating. I checked my email, compulsively jumping whenever my phone buzzed. When the notification finally came, I was in the library working on a research paper. The subject line read, "Blackwell International Scholarship, Status Update." With trembling fingers, I opened the email. "Congratulations," it began. "We are pleased to inform you that you have been selected as one of 15 finalists for the Blackwell International Scholarship." I pressed a hand to my mouth to stifle a scream of joy in the quiet library. I had made it to the final round. Me, Skylar Adams, from a suburban Boston family where academic achievement was an afterthought, had been recognized as one of the top 15 international relations students in the world. The email contained details about the final interview in Washington, D.C., scheduled for 3 weeks later. All expenses would be covered by the Blackwell Foundation. I would be interviewed by a panel of 7 judges, including 2 UN ambassadors, 3 Oxford professors, and 2 previous scholarship recipients. The preparation was intense. I researched each judge's background and professional interests, I practiced potential interview questions with Professor Jenkins for hours. I even used my tutoring money to buy a professional navy blue suit, wanting to project competence and seriousness. That Sunday, I went home for our monthly family dinner. I didn't particularly want to go, but Grandmother Martha would be there, and I was eager to share my news with her. As we sat around the dining table, my father asked the perfunctory question he always did. "So, anything new with you girls?" Tiffany immediately launched into a story about being promoted at the retail store where she worked part-time. My parents listened attentively, asking questions and offering congratulations. When there was finally a lull, I took a deep breath. "Actually, I have some news too," I said. "I've been selected as a finalist for the Blackwell International Scholarship. If I get it, I'll be going to Oxford for graduate school and interning at the United Nations." There was a moment of silence. My father frowned slightly. "Oxford? That's in England, right? Why would you want to go all the way over there? There are plenty of good schools right here in America." My mother looked concerned. "That sounds very competitive, Skylar. I don't want you to be disappointed if it doesn't work out. It's good to have realistic expectations." Tiffany's expression had darkened. "So, you'd just leave everyone behind. That's kind of selfish, don't you think?" I stared at them, my excitement evaporating. I shouldn't have been surprised, but somehow their reaction still hurt. "It's an incredible opportunity," I said quietly. "One of the most prestigious scholarships in the world." "Well, good luck, I guess," my father said, already turning his attention back to Tiffany. "Now, tell us more about this promotion. Will you be managing other employees?" Later that evening, as my grandmother was preparing to leave, she pulled me aside and hugged me tightly. "I am so proud of you," she whispered fiercely. "So proud. You call me the minute you hear the results, no matter what time it is." Her words were a balm to my wounded spirit. At least someone in my family understood what this meant to me. The week before my Washington, D.C. interview, I was a bundle of nerves and excitement. I had prepared meticulously, reviewing global current events each morning, practicing my interview responses each afternoon, and visualizing success each night before sleep. My flight was scheduled for Thursday morning, with the interview on Friday. The Blackwell Foundation had booked me a room at a Georgetown hotel where all the candidates would be staying. On Monday evening, I decided to organize my travel documents. I took out my passport, checking the expiration date even though I knew it was valid for another 6 years. I placed it in the top drawer of my desk, alongside my printed flight information hotel confirmation and a folder containing copies of my application materials. Throughout the week, I noticed Tiffany hanging around my apartment more than usual. She had her own place closer to the community college she now attended. But suddenly, she was dropping by unannounced, asking about my preparations for the interview, wanting to see the outfit I'd chosen. At the time, I was touched by what I interpreted as genuine interest. "You really think you have a shot at this thing?" she asked on Tuesday as she lounged on my bed, watching me practice interview questions in front of the mirror. "I think I've prepared as well as I possibly can," I answered carefully. "The competition will be incredible, but yes, I believe I have a chance." Tiffany made a non-committal sound and changed the subject. On Wednesday morning, just one day before my flight, I opened my desk drawer to get my passport for final packing. It wasn't there. I felt a flicker of concern but assumed I had moved it. I checked my backpack, my suitcase, the kitchen counter. No passport. The flicker became a flame of panic. I tore my apartment apart, emptying drawers, looking under furniture, checking pockets of clothes I hadn't worn in weeks. The passport was nowhere to be found. I even drove to campus thinking I might have inexplicably taken it to my Carol in the library. Nothing. By Wednesday afternoon, full-blown panic had set in. My flight was at 8:00 a.m. the next day. Without a passport, I couldn't travel to Washington for the interview. Without the interview, my chance at the scholarship was gone. I called my parents, trying to keep my voice steady. I can't find my passport anywhere, I explained. I'm supposed to fly out tomorrow morning for that scholarship interview. Is there any chance I left it at your house during Sunday dinner? I haven't seen it, my mother said. Are you sure you haven't just misplaced it? You know how scattered you get when you're stressed. I gritted my teeth at the unfair characterization. I was many things, but scattered wasn't one of them. I've looked everywhere, Mom. This is really important. Could you and Dad please check the house? Maybe it fell out of my bag. She agreed, but called back 20 minutes later to report they hadn't found anything. As a last resort, I drove to my parents' house to search myself and to see if Tiffany was there. She had a key to my apartment after all, and had been there multiple times that week. When I arrived, my entire family was in the living room, including Tiffany. Something about her expression immediately set off alarm bells. There was a hint of a smirk that she quickly tried to hide when she saw me. Have you seen my passport? I asked her directly. Why would I have seen your passport? She replied too innocently. I looked at her closely, years of suspicion and hurt crystallizing into certainty. Because you took it, I said quietly. The room exploded. My parents immediately jumped to Tiffany's defense. How dare you accuse your sister like that? My father thundered. Skylar, that's a terrible thing to say, my mother added, putting a protective arm around Tiffany, who had manufactured tears. But I had seen it just for a flash before the tears started that smirk again. She had my passport. I was certain of it. I need it back, Tiffany, I said, ignoring my parents. This interview is my future, please. I don't have your stupid passport, she insisted, but there was something in her voice, a note of satisfaction. Check her room, I said to my parents. Please, just check. We are not going to invade your sister's privacy based on wild accusations, my father said firmly. Tiffany would never do something like that. The argument escalated. I begged, pleaded, tried to make them understand the importance of this opportunity. Tiffany maintained her innocence but seemed to be enjoying the drama. Finally, in a moment of frustration, she let her mask slip. Maybe it's a sign you're not meant to go, she said with a shrug. Things happen for a reason. My father nodded, his expression softening into something like pity. Some opportunities aren't meant for everyone, Skylar. Maybe this is for the best. I stared at him in disbelief. What does that mean? My mother sighed, patting my hand condescendingly. Honey, we're just saying that perhaps you should be realistic about your place in the world. Not everyone gets to go to Oxford. There are plenty of good jobs right here in Boston. I felt as if I'd been slapped. They weren't just failing to help me. They were actually glad this was happening. In their minds, this failure would bring me back into line, back to their modest expectations, back to a life where I wouldn't outshine Tiffany. I left their house in tears, driving back to my apartment in a fog of despair and betrayal. I collapsed on my bed, allowing myself to feel the full weight of what had happened. My own sister had stolen my passport to sabotage my future. My parents, instead of helping me, had all but admitted they wanted me to fail. As I lay there staring at the ceiling, a memory suddenly surfaced. Professor Jenkins, during a discussion about international travel for a conference last year, had told me, always have a contingency plan, Skylar. In diplomacy, as in life, things rarely go exactly as expected. With those words echoing in my mind, I suddenly sat up. Perhaps all was not lost. 6 months earlier, I had visited my grandmother for her 70th birthday. We had spent the weekend together talking about my studies and my hopes for the future. At one point, the conversation turned to my family dynamics. I wish I could say they'll change, Grandmother Martha had said, sadness in her eyes. But after all these years, I think we have to accept that Michael and Diane have their blind spots, especially when it comes to you and Tiffany. I had nodded, trying not to show how much it still hurt. You know, she continued thoughtfully. My mother used to tell me something that I've never forgotten. Always keep your most precious possessions where the most precious people in your life can find them. For her, that meant important documents were kept both at home and at her sister's house just in case. That conversation had planted a seed. When I received my new passport the following month, I had remembered my grandmother's words. On a whim, I had researched whether it was possible to have two valid passports simultaneously. It turned out that under certain circumstances, Americans could legally hold a second valid passport, particularly for frequent international travelers or those with specific security concerns. Given my career aspirations in international relations and the possibility of traveling to countries with complex visa situations, I had applied for a second passport. The process required additional documentation and justification. But with Professor Jenkins' help providing a letter about my academic field requiring frequent international travel, my application had been approved. This second passport had been sitting in a sealed envelope in my grandmother's apartment for months, a contingency I hadn't expected to need. Now, at 11 o'clock at night, I called my grandmother. "Skylar, is everything okay?" she answered, concern evident in her voice at the late hour. Through tears, I explained what had happened with my passport and my family's reaction. "Those fools," she muttered, uncharacteristically harsh. "I'm coming over right now." "Grandma, it's late. You don't have to." "Nonsense. I'm already putting on my coat. I'll be there in an hour. And Skylar? Don't worry. We're going to fix this." True to her word, my grandmother arrived at my apartment just after midnight holding a sealed envelope. Inside was my second passport, valid and ready. I broke down in relief, hugging her tightly. "Thank you," I whispered. "I don't know what I would have done." "You would have found another way," she said confidently. "You always do. That's what they don't understand about you, Skylar. You're not just intelligent, you're resourceful." She stayed the night on my couch, insisting on driving me to the airport the next morning. We agreed that there was no point in confronting my family again. They had made their position clear. Before leaving for the airport, I wrote a brief note and left it on my kitchen counter, knowing my parents would likely come by when they couldn't reach me. Some opportunities are meant for everyone. You just have to fight for them. As I boarded the plane to Washington, D.C., I felt a complex mixture of emotions. Hurt and betrayal, yes, but also a strange sense of liberation. For the first time, I was seeing my family clearly, without the filter of hope that someday they would value me as I deserved. It was painful, but it was also freeing. My grandmother had given me one last piece of advice at the security checkpoint. Show them who you really are, Skylar. Not just the judges, but everyone who ever doubted you. I intended to do exactly that. The flight to Washington, D.C. was turbulent, matching my emotional state. I tried to focus on reviewing my notes, but my mind kept returning to the look on Tiffany's face, the dismissive words from my parents. I forced myself to push those thoughts aside. I couldn't change my family, but I could control how I responded to this opportunity. The taxi dropped me at the Georgetown University Hotel and Conference Center, an elegant building where the Blackwell Foundation had arranged accommodations for all 15 finalists. At check-in, I received a welcome packet with a schedule for the next day and brief biographies of the judges. In my room, I carefully unpacked my interview suit, hanging it in the bathroom to let the steam from the shower remove any wrinkles. I laid out my portfolio containing copies of my application materials, my resume, and additional writing samples in case they were requested. That evening, there was a casual reception for the candidates to meet each other. I almost skipped it feeling emotionally drained, but reminded myself that networking was an essential part of diplomacy. The other finalists came from all over the world: Singapore, Brazil, South Africa, Germany, and beyond. They were brilliant, accomplished, and surprisingly friendly. I met Lena from Berlin, who had created a conflict resolution program for refugee youth that had been adopted by 3 European countries. There was Mateo from Santiago, who at 23 had already published 2 papers on water security in developing nations. Each candidate had an impressive story, and I began to doubt whether I truly belonged among them. "First time in D.C.?" asked a voice beside me belonging to a confident young woman in a red dress who introduced herself as Priya from Mumbai. "Second," I admitted. "I interned for a senator last summer." "Impressive," she nodded. "I'm terrified about tomorrow, aren't you? 7 judges, 90 minutes of questioning. I've been preparing for months, but still." Her candor was refreshing. "Completely terrified," I confessed. "But also grateful to be here at all. I almost didn't make it." I surprised myself by telling her an abbreviated version of what had happened with my passport, leaving out the family dynamics, but sharing the last-minute solution. "That's awful," Priya exclaimed. "But also amazing that you had a backup. Most people would have given up." "I've learned not to rely on things going according to plan," I said with a small smile. "That's a valuable skill in international relations," she replied thoughtfully. "The ability to adapt when things go sideways." We exchanged contact information before heading back to our rooms, promising to stay in touch regardless of the scholarship outcome. That brief connection helped center me, reminding me why I was drawn to this field in the first place: the opportunity to build bridges between different people and cultures. Back in my room, I found 3 missed calls from my parents and a text message asking where I was. I turned off my phone. Tomorrow was too important to allow their drama to distract me. I fell asleep reciting the words that had become my mantra throughout college. Your worth is not determined by their recognition. The next morning, I woke at 6, allowing plenty of time for preparation. I showered, styled my hair in a neat bun, applied minimal makeup, and put on my navy blue suit with a crisp white blouse. Professional, confident, but not flashy. My interview was scheduled for 10:30 a.m. I arrived at the conference room 30 minutes early, reviewing my notes one last time in a nearby sitting area. At precisely 10:25, an assistant called my name. The interview room was intimidating. A large conference table with 7 distinguished individuals seated on one side, a single chair on the other. Nameplates identified each judge, 2 UN ambassadors from Japan and Kenya, 3 Oxford professors specializing in different aspects of international relations, and 2 previous Blackwell scholars who now worked in global policy. "Ms. Adams," greeted the chair, Professor Eleanor Richardson from Oxford. "Thank you for joining us today. We've been looking forward to meeting you." I smiled, channeling a confidence I didn't entirely feel. "The pleasure is mine. Thank you for the opportunity." The questions began gently enough, asking about my academic journey and what had drawn me to international relations. Then they became more challenging. "In your essay, you discussed the concept of principled pragmatism in diplomacy," said Ambassador Kimathi from Kenya. "Could you elaborate on how this might be applied to current tensions in the South China Sea?" I took a deep breath and launched into my response, drawing on case studies, legal precedents, and theoretical frameworks I'd studied. With each question, I felt more comfortable, more in my element. The panel asked about my thesis on humanitarian intervention, my volunteer work with refugee families, my views on reforming international institutions. I answered thoughtfully, acknowledging complexities and avoiding simplistic solutions. Near the end of the interview, Ambassador Tanaka from Japan asked what felt like the most important question: "Ms. Adams, this scholarship is awarded to individuals who not only have academic excellence, but also demonstrate exceptional perseverance and character. Can you share with us a significant obstacle you've overcome and how that experience has shaped your approach to international challenges?" I paused, considering how to answer. I could have mentioned the general lack of support from my family, but something held me back from sharing that specific vulnerability. Instead, I focused on my journey as a first-generation college student, navigating elite academic spaces. Coming from a background where advanced education wasn't emphasized, I've had to create my own roadmap, I explained. That experience taught me that solutions often exist outside conventional pathways, and that persistence is as valuable as natural talent. In international relations, I believe this perspective is critical. The ability to see alternative routes to resolution when traditional approaches fail. The panel nodded, seeming satisfied with my answer. As the interview concluded, Professor Richardson smiled warmly. Thank you, Ms. Adams. You've given us much to consider. We'll be making our decision within 2 weeks, and all candidates will be notified simultaneously. I left the room feeling exhausted, but satisfied. I had done my absolute best. Whether it would be enough remained to be seen, but I had represented myself authentically. For now, that was enough. That evening, I finally turned my phone back on to dozens of messages and missed calls from my family. My father's texts had evolved from questioning to angry to concerned. My mother had left tearful voicemails asking if I was safe. Tiffany had sent a single message. Whatever you're doing, it won't work. I sent a brief reply to my parents. I'm safe. I made it to the interview. I'll be in touch when I return. Then I turned my phone off again and ordered room service, allowing myself to celebrate the small victory of having overcome their sabotage regardless of the scholarship outcome. The 2 weeks of waiting after returning from Washington were excruciating. I threw myself into my final exams, trying to distract myself from constantly checking my email. My family situation remained tense. I had moved most of my belongings to my apartment and avoided Sunday dinners, making excuses about study groups and project deadlines. My parents seemed genuinely bewildered by my distance. They had convinced themselves that they had been acting in my best interest, protecting me from disappointment. When I did see them briefly to collect more of my things, my father attempted an awkward conversation. You know we only want what's best for you, right? He said, hovering in the doorway of my childhood bedroom. I'm not sure you know what that is anymore, I replied, continuing to pack books into a box. My mother was more direct during a phone call later that week. I don't understand why you're being so cold, Skylar. We've always supported you. I almost laughed at the absurdity of her statement. Mom Tiffany stole my passport to prevent me from attending a life-changing interview, and you and Dad defended her. That's not support. We don't know that she took it, my mother insisted. And even if there was a misunderstanding, families forgive each other. I changed the subject, unwilling to rehash the argument when she clearly couldn't see the truth. Tiffany was the worst, adopting a smug attitude whenever our paths crossed, clearly assuming I had missed the interview and lost my chance at the scholarship. During an unavoidable family dinner the weekend before the results were due, she asked innocently, So, any news about that scholarship thing? Not yet, I replied neutrally. Well, don't get your hopes up, she said with false sympathy. Those international competitions are basically impossible to win. No one from around here ever gets those things. I simply nodded, taking a bite of mashed potatoes to avoid responding. My grandmother caught my eye from across the table and gave me a tiny wink. The notification came on a Tuesday afternoon while I was studying in the university library. The email subject line read simply, Blackwell International Scholarship, Final Decision. My hands trembled so badly I could barely click to open it. The first word I saw was congratulations. I read the entire email 3 times to be sure. Skylar Adams had been selected as one of the 5 recipients of the Blackwell International Scholarship. I would be attending Oxford University for my graduate studies, with a guaranteed internship at the United Nations to follow. I pressed my hands to my mouth, tears streaming down my face. A nearby student looked concerned, but I shook my head, smiling through the tears. I had done it. Despite everything, I had done it. My first call was to Professor Jenkins, who answered on the first ring. I got it, I said, my voice breaking. I knew you would, he replied, his own voice thick with emotion. I am so incredibly proud of you, Skylar. My second call was to my grandmother, who actually screamed with joy when I told her the news, causing me to hold the phone away from my ear. You show them, she said fiercely. You show them all what you're capable of. I hadn't planned on keeping the news from my family exactly, but I also didn't immediately share it with them. I needed time to process my achievement without their reactions coloring the experience. That decision became complicated the next day when I received another email from the Blackwell Foundation. The 5 scholarship recipients were being invited to a formal announcement ceremony in New York, which would be broadcast on CNN's international channel as part of their Education Spotlight series. We would each give a brief acceptance speech and be interviewed about our research interests and aspirations. The ceremony was scheduled for that Saturday, just 3 days away. There would be no hiding my achievement then. Part of me wanted to call my parents to give them a chance to adjust to the news privately before seeing it on television. But another part, the part that had been repeatedly dismissed and undermined, wanted them to experience the full impact of what they had nearly prevented. In the end, I compromised. I sent my parents a text message on Friday evening. You might want to watch CNN tomorrow at 2 p.m. There's going to be a segment you'll find interesting. My mother immediately called, but I let it go to voicemail. Her message was predictably curious and slightly concerned. I didn't call back. That Saturday, my grandmother helped me prepare for the ceremony. She had insisted on buying me a new dress, a sophisticated emerald green that complemented my eyes. As she zipped me into it, she squeezed my shoulders. Today is about you, she said firmly. Not about them, not about proving anything to anyone, about celebrating your incredible achievement. The ceremony was held at the CNN studios in New York. The 5 of us, myself, Priya from Mumbai, Mateo from Santiago, Lena from Berlin, and Ahmed from Cairo, were given a brief tour before being ushered into makeup and wardrobe. We had all been asked to prepare a 1-minute acceptance speech focusing on our research interests and how the scholarship would advance our goals. As we were mic'd up backstage, Priya squeezed my hand. Nervous. Terrified, I admitted. My family is probably watching. The ones who tried to sabotage you? She asked, raising an eyebrow. I nodded. Well, she said with a mischievous smile, make it good then. The broadcast began with an introduction to the Blackwell Scholarship and its prestigious history. Then, one by one, we were called to the stage to accept a symbolic certificate and give our speeches. I was the 4th to be called. From the United States, Skylar Adams, announced the host, a well-known CNN international correspondent. As I walked onto the stage, lights blinding and heart pounding, I thought of every moment my achievements had been dismissed, every time I'd been told to lower my expectations, every instance where Tiffany had been celebrated for mediocrity while my excellence was taken for granted. But when I reached the microphone, those thoughts faded. This moment wasn't about them. It was about me and the journey I had undertaken, despite the obstacles. Thank you to the Blackwell Foundation for this incredible opportunity. I began, my voice steady and clear. My research focuses on humanitarian intervention and the responsibility to protect, particularly in regions where traditional diplomatic channels have broken down. At Oxford, I hope to develop frameworks that balance sovereignty concerns with the international community's moral obligation to prevent human suffering. I paused, then continued with words I hadn't planned, but felt compelled to add. I would like to thank those who truly supported me on this journey. My mentor, Professor Jenkins, who saw potential in me before I recognized it myself. My grandmother, who taught me that determination often matters more than natural talent. And the many teachers and peers who challenged me to think more deeply about global issues. This scholarship represents not just academic achievement, but the power of believing in yourself, even when others doubt you. Thank you. The applause was warm and genuine. As I returned to my seat, I caught Priya's eye. She gave me a subtle thumbs up. After the ceremony, we were each interviewed briefly about our backgrounds and aspirations. I spoke about growing up outside Boston, my interest in international relations being sparked by a high school model UN conference, and my hopes to eventually work on refugee policy at the international level. The entire broadcast lasted just under an hour. As we were removing our microphones afterward, my phone exploded with notifications. There were messages from college friends, former teachers, and classmates I hadn't spoken to in years. And there were calls from my parents. 7 of them in the span of 10 minutes. I wasn't ready to talk to them yet. Instead, I joined the other scholarship recipients for a celebration dinner hosted by the Blackwell Foundation. We laughed, shared stories about our interview experiences, and exchanged contact information, promising to stay in touch when we all arrived at Oxford in the fall. It was nearly midnight when I returned to my hotel room and finally listened to my parents' voicemails. "Skylar, it's Mom. We just saw you on CNN. Call us immediately." "Skylar, it's Dad. Why didn't you tell us about this? Call us back." "Skylar, Mom again. We're so confused. How did you get to the interview? Please call." The messages continued in that vein, a mixture of confusion, indignation, and belated pride. There was nothing from Tiffany. I took a deep breath and called them back. My mother answered on the first ring. "Skylar, oh my God, we just saw you on television. Why didn't you tell us? We're so proud." The sudden pride after years of dismissal felt hollow. "I did tell you," I replied calmly. "I told you about being a finalist. I told you about the interview. You said, and I quote, 'Some opportunities aren't meant for everyone.'" There was an uncomfortable silence. "Well, we didn't. That's not what we meant." My father's voice came through, indicating I was on speakerphone. "We were just trying to prepare you for possible disappointment." "No," I said firmly. "You were hoping I would fail. You were relieved when you thought Tiffany had successfully sabotaged my chance." "That's not fair," my mother protested. "We never wanted you to fail." "Then why didn't you help me look for my passport? Why didn't you check Tiffany's room when I begged you to? Why did you tell me to be realistic about my place in the world?" More silence. "How did you even get to the interview?" my father finally asked, avoiding my questions entirely. "I had a second passport," I explained. "I kept it at Grandma's house as a backup. Good thing I did." "You're accusing your sister of something serious," my mother said, her voice taking on an edge. "We don't know that she took your passport." I sighed, unsurprised by their continued denial. "I'm not going to argue about this anymore. The fact is, I'm going to Oxford in the fall. I've received one of the most prestigious scholarships in international relations. I would have liked to share that joy with you, but your actions made that impossible." "Skylar, please," my father began, but I interrupted him. "I'll be home tomorrow. We can talk more then. Good night." The conversation the following day was difficult. We sat in the living room, my parents, Tiffany, and myself. My sister had posted a congratulatory message on social media positioning herself as my biggest supporter, complete with childhood photos and claims of always believing in me. The hypocrisy was stunning. "I want to be clear about something," I said once we were all seated. "I love you all. You're my family. But what happened with the passport was not a misunderstanding or a coincidence. It was deliberate sabotage." Tiffany started to protest, but I held up a hand. "I'm not asking for a confession or an apology at this point. What's done is done. What I am asking for is respect moving forward. Respect for my achievements, respect for my choices, and respect for my boundaries." My parents exchanged glances, clearly uncomfortable with my directness. "Of course we respect you," my mother said uncertainly. "Your actions haven't shown that," I replied. For years, you've minimized my achievements while celebrating Tiffany's smallest accomplishments. You've made me feel like my academic success was somehow threatening or inconvenient. That stops now. My father looked genuinely shocked. We never meant to make you feel that way. Intent doesn't change impact, I said, using a phrase Professor Jenkins often employed. I'm not asking you to understand everything about my field or my goals. I'm asking you to be happy for me when good things happen to support me, when challenges arise, and to never again suggest that I should limit my ambitions to make others more comfortable. The conversation continued for hours, alternating between defensive justifications from my parents, sullen silence from Tiffany, and my calm insistence on new family dynamics. By the end, we had reached an uneasy truce. They agreed to attend my graduation ceremony the following month and to visit me at Oxford during the winter holidays. The most surprising development came 2 weeks later when my parents suggested family counseling. They had been doing some soul-searching, my mother explained, and realized there might be truth to my perceptions of favoritism. We want to do better, my father said, uncharacteristically humble. We don't want to lose you. The counseling was awkward at first, with Tiffany resistant and my parents defensive. But over time, small breakthroughs occurred. My mother admitted that she had always found it easier to connect with Tiffany, whose interests and personality mirrored her own. My father confessed that my academic achievements sometimes intimidated him, making him feel inadequate as a parent. Tiffany was the last to engage meaningfully in the process. It wasn't until our 5th session that she finally acknowledged taking my passport. I was jealous, she admitted, not meeting my eyes. You were going to Oxford interviewing on CNN. Meanwhile, I can barely pass community college classes. It felt like you were leaving me behind. Her honesty, though long overdue, was a turning point. It didn't erase the harm she had caused, but it opened the door to a more authentic relationship between us. As for me, the months leading up to my departure for Oxford were transformative. I graduated summa cum laude with Professor Jenkins and my grandmother cheering loudly as I crossed the stage. My parents were there too, applauding with newfound appreciation. I spent the summer preparing for my move to England, reading everything I could about Oxford and the United Nations, practicing my public speaking skills, and strengthening the relationships that truly mattered to me. When I arrived at Oxford that September, I felt ready. The campus was everything I had imagined. Ancient buildings steeped in history, brilliant peers from around the world, and professors whose work had shaped international policy for decades. My small college room became home, decorated with photos of those who had genuinely supported me, Grandmother Martha, Professor Jenkins, and the new friends I had made along the way. The UN internship was even more impactful than I had anticipated. Working alongside diplomats addressing real-world crises, I found my theoretical knowledge transforming into practical skills. I contributed to policy papers, attended high-level meetings, and built a network of mentors who saw my potential. My relationship with my family continued to evolve. There were setbacks and old patterns that reemerged, but also genuine progress. My parents visited at Christmas, clearly proud, as they toured the Oxford campus and heard professors praise my work. Tiffany and I established a fragile but growing connection based on honesty rather than competition. Today, 3 years later, I am completing my doctorate at Oxford while working part-time at the UN Human Rights Council. The scholarship that changed my life has led to opportunities I couldn't have imagined that day I stood up to my family. The most valuable lesson from this journey wasn't academic at all. It was learning that family dynamics, however painful, don't determine your worth or limit your potential. Sometimes, the people who should support you the most are the ones least equipped to do so. That doesn't mean you have to accept their limitations as your own. I keep both passports now, one in my desk drawer and one in a secure location. Not out of fear that history will repeat itself, but as a reminder that there is always more than one path forward, even when the most obvious route is blocked. Have you ever had to stand up to family members who tried to hold you back from your dreams? How did you handle it, and what did you learn from the experience? Share your story in the comments below. And if this video resonated with you, please like, subscribe, and share it with someone who might need to hear that their potential isn't limited by others' expectations. Thank you for listening to my journey, and remember, some opportunities really are meant for everyone who has the courage to pursue them.